Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 57th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Coming back to you this time much more quickly than in the last. Have had a little bit of a break on this end from the work schedule. Have arrived at a point where I feel like I've got a good balance going, and so that balance sort of makes its way into other important key areas, right? And that's, I think, exactly the nature of this muckety muck mess sometimes that we call life. And so that being said, I very much appreciate all of you and your patience, your support, encouragement, kind words, spirited debates, and even those of you that come out on the TruthSocial profile and vehemently disagree and sort of seek to spark a very rousing discussion that's maybe a little contrary. I think that in many respects, as long as it's kept civil, all of that is very healthy. This is an awakening process, right? This is a process to take back our ability to have wonderful, intense, deep discussions with one another, and then walk away sometimes agreeing to disagree and still being able to, have a drink afterward or, go to dinner with one another and enjoy the company of being together as thinking, individualized humans. And so that's sort of the entire spirit, if you will, of this whole process: the right to be human, the right to express human qualities, freedom of speech, freedom of information, freedom of thought, acceptance. Well, maybe not acceptance. Perhaps that's not the right word. An enjoyable, peaceful coexistence with one another at the end of the day. I think that everyone wants those things. And that, of course, is a major component of why things have been done, I think, in the way that they have been done. All of us, humanity out there as one, we the people, even those who are still on the other side of the fence, or who perhaps they have eyes to see, but they don't see what you do, or perhaps they are young in their awakening experience and they need more concrete, more overt, more kinetic change, right, in order to sort of come across the threshold, cross that event horizon, and really get on board with understanding who they are and how our world power dynamics and how our world influence dynamics have operated, not only in these last 3 years or the years before that, but really going back several generations. So that sort of gets us off to the races here and gets us started with our file today. We'll try not to take up too much of your time. We've got a few things to cover here, a couple of things I think are very critical to highlight and point out. And so without further ado, let's get right to it. We're currently in a period of time where we're seeing some sort of transitory phase take place in the same fashion that we saw a transitory phase begin February, March of this year, which culminated, I think, in its first major step, the first rung of that ladder being that initial charge against President Trump, against the commander-in-chief, right? And we've since seen other charges come out, and we're seeing right now, and have for weeks, really months at this point, the incredible duality at play within the U.S. judiciary system, the U.S. justice system. It's being highlighted out for everyone that what we have here in the United States are two governments at play. We have governmental actors that act on behalf of we the people, such as what we perceive right now to be our Congress, our optical Congress, as well as our executive or presidency office, which we of course know is not occupied by a we the people candidate. That's sort of a very overt portion of this understanding, the putting these narratives together, right? And then we have the Supreme Court that I think has been painstakingly showed out to try and be a neutral organization, a neutral institution. But I do believe we will see Supreme Court corruption shown out before this process is over. And then on the other side of that, we have an unelected shadow government that sort of controls the elected government apparatus that we just outlined right here, right now. And so we're seeing that shown out to play. We're seeing that given to the American population in very large spoonfuls. And so what has that spawned off? It has spawned off exactly what Q talked about: patriots in trusted positions, whistleblowers, trust yourself, trust your president, trust the plan. We are sort of shattering these different awakening areas, these different collective shells that have been placed over mankind's lens and mankind's understanding of what's really occurring in their nations, in their countries, in their communities, and the church houses that they may be a part of, or within the church organization, perhaps, if not at the local level, at the very top for sure. In most instances, we're showing these things out to the population. One of the ways we are doing that, is through this release of whistleblowers. And it's not just the congressional whistleblowers, although they are getting some of the most attention. But when you look at the last few weeks, consider how many whistleblowers have come out into the information space, not just in the official government narrative space, but within the information space. FBI, CIA, IRS, DHS, DEA, different intelligence officials, doctors, scientists, academics from around the world in different places, Dr. Gal Luft, individuals like Mike Gill and others, these citizen whistleblowers that are coming out from their key areas and their key arenas, bringing expertise, documentation, firsthand experiences that they have, very specific, very highly detailed descriptions of black operations, dark operations, money laundering networks, financial pay-to-play schemes. All of these sorts of things are coming out, and they're affecting everyone in government. They are sort of casting along that the understanding, if you will, that both sides sort of just play ping pong back and forth with one another, and then when the ping pong cameras go off for the day, they go and they have dinner together and they continue to participate in their parties and their power and their privilege. And that's exactly what we're showing out, and it's becoming such a vast flow of information that the governmental apparatus within the deep state shadow government that still is being drawn out into the light, is taking ever more reckless and ever increasingly obvious steps to try and prevent that or curtail that. Recently, we saw an example of that with Meritless Garland, and the targeting of the IRS whistleblower who actually went before the closed door session in the House of Representatives just today. We've seen a number of individuals discussing Biden family corruption, discussing kidnapping, discussing child trafficking, organized government facilitated child trafficking. We have Border Patrol discussing child trafficking, sex trafficking, all of these things, right? And it's coming out into the space in a way that the mass population, perhaps for the first time, is really hearing a lot of what we would call the real news. Now, we know on this program that a lot of that real news is being forced, if you will, by an alliance of patriots, or an alliance that in the light, or a love-based we the people alliance, if you want to call it that. All of these different terminologies to describe the same nebulous thing. But it is that group that is sort of moving power plays back and forth around the world right now and forcing the deep state apparatus, what remains of this deep shadow government around the world, to come out of hiding and into the light and show themselves out for who and what they are. And so some of those moves being made, of course, have been being made by Russia for a while, and China, Saudi Arabia, the BRICS nations in general, Turkey, the African states, etc. But specifically recently, we have Russian special operations deploying aboard nuclear submarines to bases in the Arctic region. And so that is sort of, I think, an escalatory response to the United States Navy's actions in the Pacific region with the boomers and different cooperation happening between the Philippine Islands and Japan, etc. And also Australia, although it's interesting that we had the Doomsday plane here in the United States, in Australia for a number of days, just a few days back. So we're seeing these things play out in an irregular fashion. The Russian Air Force has been sort of patrolling the Arctic perimeter for a while. They've had nuclear-capable Tu-95 bombers flying in that airspace in the last 5 to 7 months. We've seen Chinese and Russian naval assets intercepted by U.S. Coast Guard assets and U.S. Navy assets at least 3 to 4 separate times in the last 6 months. Much of that occurring in the Bering Sea, or in those sort of subarctic and Arctic regions. And the Canadian military is now actively involved in monitoring the expansion of Russia's military presence, and has been for a while. You can always figure that if something shows up in the news or in the information space online, it's likely quite delayed, at least a number of weeks, perhaps more, where those operations and events have already occurred. And so the Canadian military, in an article that dropped, let me see here, just 18 hours ago, see here, It says that the Canadians are now taking Arctic security more seriously now than ever. They have deployed the military to different islands in the Arctic chain. They are currently allowing other military forces in and out of the region for exercises. Let me see here. And they comment that Russia has reopened or rebuilt a number of Cold War era military bases in the Arctic. More than 10 are now operational. Nuclear-powered submarines are now being stationed there, and nuclear submarines, as a general rule of thumb, in pretty much any organized Navy, will always carry some sort of quick deployment special operations force, what you would call a commando detachment or something along those lines. And so we have a very large presence now being made in the Arctic regions with the Russian military. The Russian government is conducting very large-scale science experiments in this region of the world. In another article that dropped just a few days ago, the North Pole 41 expedition is likely to finish in late 2023. And essentially, this is a giant floating town. Well, actually, it's smaller than that. It's a village size, really. It's got about 15 to 17 buildings on top of this floating station. And this is sort of a semi-permanent Arctic base that is mobile based on the flotation design of the structure itself. And so that expedition has been going on now for a while. It looks to be possibly concluding in late 2023, according to the TASS agency, in a report out of St. Petersburg on July the 27th. And we know that the Arctic and the Antarctic in particular are storehouses for a lot of hidden wealth, hidden natural resources, hidden technologies, a lot of disclosure pertaining to what you would call extraterrestrial life, unidentified life, rights, other sentient beings that we talk about on this program, and their technologies and their cultures and their artifacts and relics. So it's fascinating that we have this article drop in the exact same week, just a few days ago, actually, that we saw an Australian military bird headed south towards the Antarctic shelf and then go off radar. And so we're witnessing some sort of coordinated operation going on in these extremely cold, sort of not so often thought about areas of the world, because that is a core component, just like the island change, just like the human trafficking, just like the isolation, targeting, location, and destruction of military intelligence technologies and assets. This is part of that process. And so it's not a surprise to me that we have the Russian Navy now activating nuclear capable assets in this area. And it's also worth noting, remember, that we still have submarines that the Russians put to sea several months back that the Black Hat NATO military in the West is still unable to find and locate. And so that puts a whole new spin, a whole new angle on the maritime safety dynamics of the oceans around the world right now, right? The deep state pathways, the deep state channelways that they've always used, and the routes that they have always taken on the surface and below the surface in their own submarines are perhaps no longer safe. It's not a surprise, I think, when we consider the naval coordination between China and Russia, the activation of Kim and the military parade that occurred literally 24 hours after President Trump highlighted in a post on TruthSocial that Kim was back in play. We saw this military parade come out 24 hours later, highlighting the missile launch capability and the capability of the North Korean military to defend the nation. We're seeing that saber rattling get very loud. Japan and South Korea are taking very large notice of this, and they're sort of putting their forces on high alert, if you will, preparing for some sort of destabilization in that area of the world. So it's not a surprise to me, with all of these different factors at play and happening right now, that we would have things like the Niger military coup. And what was that really? That was the military of the country stepping in and realizing that the president and the entire government of that country had sold out the country and were a clear and present danger to their nation's national security. And that's exactly why we had the events play out that they did. As a matter of fact, the military coup, in an alert style announcement sent across the nation to the citizenry, essentially claimed as much. Shortly after that, just a couple of days later, we had the Niger government, this new interim military government. We hope it's interim, but this new military government come out and directly address certain members of the previous administration, the previous government, one of whom being the Minister of Finance, where he was told that he had 48 hours to account for what occurred to the country's wealth and resources while under his care. And when that statement was made, this minister burst out in tears. knowing that the punishment for not supplying an adequate accounting, or perhaps the adequate accounting showing treasonous action, he may very well end up before a firing squad. And so these sorts of events are now happening, excuse me, in large resource-based players, right? The African continent, one of the most resource-rich continents in the world. There is a reason that this NATO Black Hat alliance has essentially pilfered and pillaged and ripped off and scorched the African continent for hundreds of years at this point. They're extremely resource-rich. And so we're seeing these nations now disconnecting. And what happened during this coup? The citizenry came out before the French embassy in that nation and began chanting, "Down with France, long live Putin." And so the Russian nation, along with their coordination, I think, in the background with the Chinese on the economic, the agrarian, and the financial side of things, is now providing very real relief, very kinetic, 3D real world relief to these nations, and allowing them the chance to disconnect from the US serpent dollar system of manipulation that they have been a part of, the central bank system that has, essentially ruined many of these nations and caused untold suffering for hundreds and hundreds of millions of people. So these sorts of events are now playing out. And what's happening in the West? We're watching the continual financial disempowerment of U.S. Treasury bonds, right? We're watching the continual financial disempowerment of the banking sector, the mortgage sector, the stock market sector, right? I'm not a financial advisor, but we're watching downturns. Yes, there's up days. Yes, there's down days. But when we look at returns, real wages, the actual inflationary numbers, in other words, what gets gobbled up as a result of these inflated prices and the supply and demand economics being warped in some capacity, it is not really a pretty picture, and it's only getting worse. U.S. manufacturing is slowing. Canadian manufacturing is absolutely slowing. European manufacturing in some cases has slowed to a stop. So we are witnessing the ability of the NATO hegemony to resist influence change in the world. We're watching that ability eroded before our very eyes. And what is occurring? Well, I can tell you that, at least in the financial sector, they're finally starting to show themselves out for what exactly types of cockroaches they really truly are. We're going to go over to a thread here for a moment that came out on Twitter on the 11th of July. So this is a little bit of old news. It's about 3 weeks old now. The thread discussing Bank of America, discussing the seizure of accounts, of private citizens' accounts here in the United States with absolutely no warning or information. Let me get over here and pull this up. All right, thread tweeted out at 14:39 Eastern Standard Time, July the 11th, 2023. I'm currently with my wife and daughter in a Bank of America office. They shut down my account without any notice or explanation, and we won't be able to feed our family or pay medical bills. We are staying here until it's fixed. So far, they have refused to even explain why they did this. Next post, had to reshare this because the first version had card info. Would appreciate if you could retweet just as you all did earlier. Thank you. Next post, for the record, this is relatively common apparently, and they apparently purposefully refuse to let you find out any information at all. The process can drag out for months while people wait for money to feed their families. And then the poster here cites a CBS News article in that particular post that was published in June of 2022. Next post. So apparently this is quite common and spreading. In the end, only 4% of the people affected by this actually warrant investigation, but the banks don't care. We're staying here because we have no choice, though. And then the poster puts up a New York Times article. Banks are closing customer accounts with little explanation. Let me see if I can get a date. I don't subscribe to the Times. April 8th of 2023 was the date on that New York Times article. Next post, update. The manager on the call said he was going to pass me on to his manager, and then they hung up, so we're still here. Next post, just got connected to another manager who told me the same thing everyone else told me and refused to help, and then told me that every person I speak to will say the same thing. I said, okay, please let me speak to your manager. We're not leaving. The replies have horror stories. So sad. Next post, the branch manager removed the hold on the account and transferred it to another one. So we have our money and we can feed our family. But that's thanks to all of you on Twitter. The moment they saw what you did sharing it and then heard CBS wanted to cover it, the tone instantly shifted within the bank. Big shout out to CBS LA Christine, who undoubtedly made things shift here. This is my wife, who is the one who pushed me to refuse to leave the office and spread the word with her cameraman. Next post. For the record, I've now spoken with many people going through this or who have gone through this, and they don't have the ability to do a tweet like this and generate public outcry. I'm extremely lucky, but this affects countless families. People don't have the support they need. It's horrible. Next post. In the meantime, the account itself is still shut down without explanation. Nothing was actually resolved at a technical level. I got lucky that the pressure caused them to remove the hold. Sending love to anyone struggling financially right now. What a horror show. Next post. If you are dealing with this or have dealt with it, I can connect you to folks who want to cover it. Hit me up. Let's get the story out there. Next post. One more update. Bank of America called me and told me the issue had been escalated internally. They promised me that instead of the usual time, they'd be able to explain to me exactly what happened by tomorrow morning. As others have said, it shouldn't take a viral post to get them to act like this. Next post. The escalation team has just reached out. This is the next day. The escalation team just reached out to me. They told me that the account was shut down and they would not give me a reason. I asked them if they would ever give me a reason, and they said no. So there we have it. These sorts of events aren't just happening with Bank of America. JP Morgan Chase has been accused of doing this exact sort of pattern here, this bait and switch silent removal pattern in more than 20 states here within the United States in the last 3 months, primarily targeting accounts that they ideologically disagree with, which, of course, if you're listening to this program, would shock you absolutely zero. But understanding that they are now showing themselves out, we have forced them into a corner where they have to do things that are this desperate. They have to, for lack of a better term, they have to piss us off now, because the only options left for them to maintain their control, for them to maintain their hegemony as long as they can, for them to drag out their meager, filthy existence as long as they can, they're now having to do those brazen, tyrannical things that we all know and we all saw was coming when the 2020 event happened, when the COVID-19 crime happened. And when we look back and we study the history, it becomes as no surprise then that this is yet another pattern, playbook known. It's not a surprise. This is exactly what we've seen talked about in history books. Yes, our history books have been warped. Yes, our history books have been fabricated in many respects, but the overarching themes of totalitarian control, the desire to have more and more control over humanity while gaslighting us with the content of who those themes actually apply to. The themes themselves have always been in the history books, and now for the first time, we understand as one humanity everywhere who the tyrants really are, who the controllers at the top really are, how they've gotten away with this for as long as they have, who the gray pope is, who the black pope is, who the Farnese family is, who the Medici family is, who the Colonna family is, who the Pacer family is, right? Who the Bilderberg group is, who the Brandenburgs are, right? These are all, this is all clarity that ties back to the common understanding that there is a totalitarian locus of control at the very top of power in the world that has manipulated all of us, manipulated our nation states, our commerce, our finance, our business sector, our militaries, our technological capabilities, our understanding of science, our understanding of academia, how deep our education really goes, what our education even is, right? In many respects, completely warping the concept of education as a vessel or as a conduit for a greater realization of knowledge, which is what it was always supposed to have been. So they are now at a point of desperation where they're showing themselves out to be exactly who they are, and it's only going to get, I think, a little bit more dramatic and a little bit more concerning from here. Not to say that to scare or alarm anyone. That's not at all what I'm doing. But I do want to stress and clarify that, you know, we have asked now for a couple of years, right? Many of us woke up in late 2019, early 2020, and then the 2020 election, of course, with the COVID and the treason and the interference and the theft. All of these things really spawned off a much larger scale awakening. And that's the lens that a lot of us are bringing to the table, right? Just within the last 3 years. And we've wanted it righted so badly. We've wanted to see things corrected so badly. And here we are. This is the time of correction. This is where the ship is running into the iceberg, and we have to pull it away enough so that we don't sort of cause the Titanic scene on us, right? We have to cause the Titanic for them. But unfortunately, we're all on the boat. And so we have to do this as gingerly, as delicately as we possibly can. But we must do it right. We must do it thoroughly. There will not be another opportunity for all of us around there in the world to come together as one unified force, capitalize on that momentum of consciousness, capitalize on that God force momentum of love that we're all expressing in this journey. This is our time. This is our moment. So, and we can tell that this is our moment because we're watching different officials in different key areas being prepped for removal. Look at Joe Biden's health just within the last 6 to 8 weeks, and all of the reports discussing his health and his vacations and the rests and things like that. The executive order debacle that came out just a few days ago, where he came up there, gave a speech, and walked away, didn't even sign the order. He had to be pulled back on stage by an individual to sign the order. And of course, behind him, we could see U.S. Marshals. Excuse me, with Senator McConnell recently, we saw the exact same thing. They actually used a hypnosis style mind control sleight of hand, if you will, or tactic, if you want to call it that, a psychological warfare operation tactic, and actually had him shut down, just like a robot, if you want to call it that. And so what is that? Well, this is someone who has either agreed to play a part so very specifically and so very thoroughly and completely that he is able to pivot with these sorts of acting maneuvers on stage, or we're seeing some sort of mind control program that is being activated, and MK Ultra is capable of implanting certain psychological responses and then activating them at touch. And this is, or at the site of certain content, or at a certain sound or a certain frequency. I mean, these are all very real things. All we have to do is go and look up the CIA Vault, all of their dark projects, Project Montauk, Project Sanguine, right? All of these different things. And we can establish that the ability to influence someone's flow of thought within their head at a moment in time can be done through brief physical contact. And it's oftentimes done through contact on the neck, the cheek, arms, or the hands. And so we saw this happen with Mitch in real time. And so what is this setting up? Well, it's setting up a much larger disclosure, I think, for the health of all of the U.S. government, right? And not just in a metaphorical sense, but the literal physiological health of the individuals that are in the government pulling strings right now. Dianne Feinstein, for example, and recently leaking on a hot mic. Oh, Ms. Feinstein, you just have to say or yay, or whatever it was. These sorts of comeuppances into the narrative space, these sorts of reconciliations with the truth, what is really the case with these people, right? The cognitive ability, their ability to function. Of course, we know that many of them are under some sort of plea. Many of them are under some sort of submission deal. Many of them have agreed to forfeit certain rights and privileges, in their individualized walk, in exchange for a part to play in this greater awakening process, in exchange for going down in history, maybe as someone who was, a corrupt rat, but not outright evil, right? And I'm not making a commentary on anyone specifically right now. I'm simply saying that these are dynamics that are at play with some of these individuals. And so we are witnessing, between Kamala Harris not able to finish a sentence, Nancy Pelosi's gone, Trump keeps calling Hillary beautiful Hillary, and she's not doing very many public speaking engagements right now. We have Barack Obama recently coming out into the narrative mainstream space with injured hands, 36 hours after, or 48 hours after his personal chef drowned in 3 feet of water with blunt force trauma to the head. We're setting all of this up to show that the U.S. government is unhealthy. The individuals in the government are unhealthy. They are unfit. They cannot execute the job. They're either corrupt, they're captured, or they're beyond a point of what is a reasonable expectation to be had, and a reasonable academic expectation of their ability to discharge the duties of the office. We're beyond that now. And so these operations, I believe, are setting us up for what is going to be a major, major flip in governmental power, and a changeover in governmental power as we go through these next few weeks and months together. These financial events are progressing rapidly at the same time this is occurring. Remember that we still haven't seen anything recently as a result of the satellite phones distributed to individuals within the U.S. Senate, right? And that could be preparatory of a special operation that may take weeks or months to execute beyond those initial issuances of those communications devices, right? Just today, we watched an irregular military operation leak Greek military battle plans online in a public space and shame the defense minister of the Greek government right now in doing so at the exact same time. In a very similar fashion that battle plans were leaked from the Ukrainian conflict and from other militaries over the last 4 to 6 weeks, right? We're watching cyber infiltration sort of complementing the financial movements in those spaces and in the business sector, which sort of complements the progression of events that's occurring at the militarized and the governmental geopolitical sector, right? It all sort of informs one another, and they bounce these pinballs off to get us further down the line, if we want to call it that. And this is a very crude analogy, but it is to highlight that one sector of operations, one theater and area of operations informs directly what occurs and the pace of the events that occur in another theater and another sector of operations, right? And so we're in a phase right now that is very accelerated, and I am extremely optimistic to see what comes as a result of the month of August. According to my research, it looks like we're going to see a massive escalation in conflict from Russia in Eastern Europe sometime before the end of August or around the 1st of September, possibly Labor Day in that area. There has been a massive Russian force buildup. The Russian military has recruited a record number of individuals since the January months, and those individuals would now have had time to go through their initial training exercises, right? Their initial training processes, typically a 3 to 6 month process in a first world military to come in, specialize in whatever you're going to specialize in, and then go through your basic training, your job school training, your combat training, whatever fitness trainings have to occur, whatever academic trainings or classes have to occur, right? That's 180 days is a pretty standard period of time for a lot of that. And so we're now seeing a great deal of recruits first recruited in the first 90 days of this year coming out of that training, moving into either combat readiness status or readiness for their next phase of trainings. President Putin highlighted that the Wagner Group would not be back to operations until August, which I think is, or excuse me, Prigozhin highlighted that the Wagner Group would not be back to operations until August. I think that that is very telling. We're still witnessing the Russian Air Force and the Russian Red Army forces in the south and southwest of the country, certainly in the Black Sea area with the Russian Navy, the Crimea Bridge, those active front areas of operations, those are not ceasing, right? Those military operations continue through this time period, but there is sort of a lull in the storm. Recently, the Russian Defense Ministry identified that more than 20,000 Ukrainian service members, including very young ones and very old ones, had been unfortunately destroyed in the Ukrainian counteroffensive that has been attempted for the last several weeks. And we saw a second push just about 72 hours ago, beginning with that. The Russians are very deeply entrenched in their defensive positions. They're very, very capable of repelling the attacks. They repelled more than 7 attacks just yesterday, July 30th, 2023, more than 7 attacks on that day alone. And the Air Force is continuing the pressure on Ukrainian fuel depots, Ukrainian staging depots, armored convoys. We recently saw footage emerge from a Russian drone that actually took a picture right before it impacted with a Ukrainian-run Western-made armored personnel carrier with an individual in the top gunner seat holding his telephone. So when we look at what's occurring here, I think it's very obvious that the Russians are not going away. They're not going to be sort of moved off of the block, so to speak, and an escalation has to come. We can't consider ourselves through this process until certain territories have been returned to their rightful owners. The NATO states will be involved in this conflict before it's over, and I suspect that will occur as a result of whatever occurs with Russia's next moves. We know that the Baltic states are sort of in the crosshairs, and that President Lukashenko in Belarus has highlighted to President Putin and the rest of the world that CIA operatives in Poland and in the Baltic states just to the north of the country have been plotting a way to destabilize, infiltrate, and sabotage or destroy the Belarusian government's ability to maintain order and control. And so we're seeing these next moves being readied in a big way. It's not a surprise that we're starting to see the desperation response moves that would have to occur here in the NATO West, here in the European nations, in order to try and keep a lid on it, right? In order to try and make do like everything is still hunky-dory and everything is fine. And we know that it is not. And so Patriots, friends, families, loved ones out there, if you're listening to this broadcast right now, please understand that you've been chosen for a moment in time. You've been chosen for a calling. You've been chosen for a job that only you and your spiritual capacity, along with all of the rest of us here together, we could only accomplish in the mixture and in the proportions and the percentages that we are all here together as one we the people. This cannot occur again. This is perhaps one of the most exciting, enthusiastic times to be alive, because for the first time in many, many hundreds of years, and what may be the last time for many, many hundreds of years, humanity has the ability to not only break away from the tyrannical controllers that have hidden in the backgrounds, the silent thieves who have manipulated our world and who have co-opted us with other sentient being races that wish to do us harm. We stand now united as one we the people, ready to throw off such a structure, ready to throw off such a power. And it will be the first time that such a power has been thrown off worldwide since very nearly the beginning. This is an incredible, amazing time. I hope all of you are as excited as I am and as encouraged as I am by the progress that we are making. These idiots could not be more desperate, and I, for one, am very much enjoying witnessing them squirm and writhe in their seats as we make them watch the destruction of their own world. So everyone, friends, brothers and sisters, patriots everywhere, I want to extend my love again to all of you and to encourage you to keep up the fight, keep holding the line, and keep moving forward. We are winning. It may not seem like it in the narrative space, and a certain amount of narrative disinformation is necessary to keep the enemy confused. Another amount, I think, of disinformation is also necessary to protect real-world operations that categorically demonstrate we are winning. Keep hanging in there. I'll be back with each of you again soon. This is SG Anon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.